Hello?
All right. Looks like it's 6 o'clock and we have a few people coming in. I will give it about 1 more minute and then we can go ahead and start just to make sure people have time to get in here. All right, it's 6:02, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, good evening, and thank you everyone for joining. My name is Eric Guzman. I am a staff attorney with the Department of Public Service, and I am going to share my screen here in a second. So we can briefly go over the agenda and just set some guidelines here for the presentation. So I'm sharing my screen right now. I think I will just keep it in this format unless, okay. All right, so my name is Eric Guzman with the Department of Public Service. We have an agenda here. So for the first few minutes, we're just going to go over general instructions. Then we're going to do a overview from the department over the commission procedure and the current status of this cell tower for location in North Hollow Road in Granville, followed by a presentation by AT&T. And then a period for question and answer, as well as a period for public comments from the public. I just want to go over, I just want to notify everyone that this meeting is being recorded, and that recording, well, I think it will be posted in the chat, but probably need to be clear on that. But as far as participation, when we get to the question and answer period and the comment period, if everyone who is on computer and able to see the raise hand function for Zoom, what we're going to do at the beginning is for the question and answer, if you have a question, please raise your hand at the beginning, and then we will go systematically through each question, and then the same for the public comment period. And I ask that we keep the chat function clear, just so we do not have side conversation going on the Zoom call. Rather, we just use the raise hand function. And I also ask that mics and cameras be muted unless you are speaking. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm here to just provide an overview of the Section 248 process, as well as the current status of the case. And this is the Granville North Hollow proposed cell tower. So just to start off here, the Department of Public Service's role is it represents the public interest in electricity, telecommunications, and limited wastewater and water matters. It is a statutory party in proceedings before the Public Utility Commission. The department does not issue decisions. It is a party and provides recommendations to the commission for which the commission will consider and in its final ruling. And the department receives input from municipalities, and if the municipality requests the department retain an expert on any specific issue, the department may do that, and the consultant will conduct an independent analysis for that. The department for cell tower siting cases, section 248As, reviews projects on typically on aesthetics of the surrounding region, as well as the project's impact on public health and safety. The department also considers the cell tower's compliance with municipal plans. So this is just a visual overview to start with. I provided this because I intend on making this presentation available. So hopefully this is, at least helpful for those who are visual learners like myself. Just to briefly run through it here, the Section 248A process for approval of telecommunications facilities begins with a 60-day advance notice to the Public Utilities Commission, the municipalities and regional planning commissions, the Department of Public Service, and other state agencies. Within that advance notice period, the municipalities may request a public meeting where the department and the petitioner attend. The department will consider comments and information obtained at that meeting and making its recommendation to the commission. And currently, we are currently doing a public meeting. However, this is a unique circumstance where that public meeting is being held outside of the 60-day advance notice period. So then you move on. Once that 60-day period has occurred, a petition may be filed by the applicant. The petition in the Granville case was actually filed on March 23rd, 2021. And we have received a request from the commission for a 30-day comment period, request for hearing, or request for intervention. That typically is 30 days from when the petition is filed. However, public comments, requests for hearing, and requests for interventions in this matter have been extended to May 28th, 2021. So once that request for comment, hearing, or intervention period has lapsed, whether the commission looks to see whether any significant issues have been raised by interveners within public comments or by the state agencies. And those are typically issues raised for aesthetics, historic sites, air, water, and purity, natural environment, public health and safety, as well as impact to scenic corridors. If no issue has been raised by any interested party, the commission will typically go to a final order, and if approved, will issue a certificate of public good approving the telecommunications facility. If a significant issue is raised, the proceeding then moves to a full contested case process. Now, we are not at that period yet. We're still within the 30-day comment period over here, which has been extended, like I said, to May 28th. In this matter, there have been issues that have been raised, specifically on aesthetics, compliance with municipal and regional plans, also known as orderly development, as well as the issue raised by some interveners on need of the cell tower. So, like I said, the petition is filed with the commission on the commission's website. The petition typically contains, well, it's required to contain site plans, elevation drawings, coverage maps, a narrative by the applicant describing the project, as well as addressing co-location and environmental impact. The petition was filed on March 23rd, and that can be in the entire petition, as well as any exhibits, supporting exhibits and testimony from the applicant can be viewed by the public. And I've through the EPUC site, and I've provided a link here. And I will go briefly over how to access that if you do not have the link. So where we're at right now is that 30-day comment period, like I stated. The comment period is for the commission to receive any input from members of the public, state agencies, municipalities on those substantive criteria. Parties and members of the public may point to particular issues that the project may have with aesthetics, historic site, on the natural environment, public health and safety. And those are typically received by a date certain. So that's where we're at right here. And then, like I said, once we move to the past that comment period, we either go to a final determination, or if significant issues are present, we move to a contested schedule. And a contested schedule typically involves several smaller steps, including scheduling for that contested schedule, scheduling for discovery, which is the receipt of it's the receipt and giving of information for the parties to sort of build their positions in a contested case. The parties may also submit additional testimony exhibits during this phase, and the parties may request an evidentiary hearing before the commission in this phase. Once the evidentiary hearing is held, the parties may then file a memorandum or brief arguing their position. So all that being said, we are currently in the 30-day comment period. If the commission determines that the matter is contested, we do move to the full sort of more formal litigation process. So currently, the deadline for public comments and requests for hearing is May 28th. Public comments can be made to the commission on the EPUC site. Also, requests for hearing and requests for intervention are made on the site as well, on the EPUC site. The department, after this current hearing, the department will be requesting that the commission hold a public hearing on its own with the hearing officer in attendance. And this is just to provide members of the public an opportunity to directly speak to the commission and make public comments. That now, if you are intending on making a public comment, you can do that through this avenue directly to the commission, or you can make a written comment to the commission through EPUC. And currently, the department has retained an aesthetics consultant to review this project and anticipate completion of that report by early June. And also on this PowerPoint, just to provide a little information on how to navigate the EPUC site. I have provided an instruction here to go to the site. If you don't have a link directly to this particular case, the Granville case, you can go to EPC, search by case number, enter the case number, which is 21-1144-PET, and that will take you to the portal where all of the documents on this matter are held. If you would like to make a public comment through EPUC, you go to that case portal that I described. There is a drop-down menu at the top where you can select add public comment or add motion to intervene. The steps are rather intuitive. Once you get past this stage, it allows you to enter any public comment or upload a Word or PDF document if you've written it in that format. Additionally, if you'd like to view any of the documents in this case, there are tabs on the main page that includes a general summary of the case, the parties involved, the current schedule, commission issued orders, pre-filed testimony from the applicant or any parties who are entering testimony, as well as viewing the public comment tab where you can view public comments from members of the public. And also, if you'd like to download any of these files, you just click the small page icon. It will download the document directly to your computer. You do not have to have an account to have access to this portal. And then finally, I've included several links to the Commission's standards and procedures for 248A cases, the 248A statute. Both of these lay out the regulatory, the rules from the Commission, as well as the statutory language for siting of telecommunications facilities. I've also included the link to the motion to intervene form if a party is interested in intervention. I've included the link to the application, as well as a link to the Commission's public participation information page, which is very helpful for walking anyone through the process. So with that, that is just a general overview of the current Commission process, as well as the status of the case. I will hand it over to Will Dodge to give a presentation on the project and address any concerns that they feel need to be addressed at this time. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing here, and I will let Will share his presentation.
Thank you, Eric. So my name is Will Dodge. I'm an attorney with Downs Racklin Martin. We're representing AT&T in preparing the application. And what I'm going to do tonight with my colleagues from Centerline Communications, Jeff Delicali and Janelle Smith, as well as Sohail Usmani, who's with C-Squared Systems, and Louis Hodgetts, who's with Du Bois and King, is to walk through some of the concerns that were expressed by the Town of Granville Select Board on April 13th, 2021, when they moved to intervene in the case. And so just kind of as a general set of topics that we're going to talk about, the fuel for the emergency generator. We're going to address a concern about decommissioning the facility in the future. We're going to talk about public safety. We're going to go through in some detail the coverage on Vermont Route 100, both in terms of its use for FirstNet as well as for AT&T. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the alternative locations that we looked into and ruled out as part of the project, and show you a couple of alternative tower designs that we've considered but are not yet proposing for the project. And then at the very end, we'll talk briefly about construction impacts, that latter topic being something not raised directly in the letter, although it does go to aesthetics to some degree. So I'm going to start with my colleague, Jeff Delicali, who's with Centerline communications and is responsible for project management. Jeff, you're unmuted, correct?
I am. Can everybody hear me okay?
That's great. So Jeff, you're aware that one of the concerns expressed by the select board is that they wanted to make sure that any fuel storage at the facility was protected with the best technology to prevent any spillage to the surrounding area, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you remind us what's the purpose of the emergency generator? And I'll just show it here as being one of the project elements in the general compound that we're proposing to build. What's the generator for?
Sure. So this facility is being built to provide 24/7 cell phone coverage for both public safety and civilian telecommunications. A backup generator helps to keep the facility powered during an electrical outage. So once the energy has been depleted from the backup batteries, so most cell sites have 2 layers of backup power. One of them is backup batteries, which are installed inside the shelter. They provide approximately 24 hours of backup power for AT&T's equipment. After 24 hours, or once the batteries are getting low, then the generator will automatically turn on and then keep AT&T's equipment functional for up to 72 hours before it needs to be refueled, or when power has been fully restored to the area.
Thank you, Jeff. Can you remind us or describe us where and how the diesel fuel is going to be contained?
So the fuel will be self-contained in an underwriter laboratories, or what they call UL 142 double-walled tank inside the belly of the generator.
So is that right here on the screen?
That's correct.
And it's a 54-gallon fuel tank, is that correct?
54 gallons, correct.
Okay. And how is the fuel and the generator usage monitored at the cell site?
The generator actually includes an advanced monitoring system, which allows AT&T to remotely diagnose, control, and monitor all the generator operations from their network operations center. So it's basically monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's all sorts of warning alarms. There's fuel level alarms, voltage alarms, temperature alarms. So it's a very high-tech piece of machinery.
And so if an alarm goes off, what happens? And the headquarters receives notice that there's an issue. What generally happens?
So what generally happens is that the network operations center will submit a service ticket depending on the severity of the alarm, and that will dispatch one of AT&T's operations managers or people that are in the field to go check out the site and see what sort of issues there are with the generator or anything for that matter.
And do you know if there's been any spill incidents for any of AT&T's facilities in Vermont?
There have been no spill incidents in Vermont.
And roughly how many sites have generators like this one with that belly tank, with that fuel container?
Sure. In Vermont, 101 cell sites have a fixed generator for emergency power. And that's based on 212 active cellular sites that AT&T has in Vermont.
Okay, thank you. So now I want to go to another issue that was raised in the town's intervention, and that's this sentence that if the tower and/or technology is no longer in use, the tower must be removed and the area needs to be restored to its natural state. You're aware of that statement, correct?
That's right, correct.
And how is AT&T proposing to address that concern?
Well, in the unlikely event that AT&T ceases operations at this facility, they'll remove all their equipment on site and restore it to its original condition. AT&T has also provided the town of Granville with a removal bond in the amount of $39,000.
Okay. And who provides that estimate for the removal cost? How's that determined?
It's based on AT&T's construction team and their civil engineering team.
Okay. And then does that removal include the foundation and all the rest of the concrete that's installed as part of the compound?
So foundations and concrete will be removed to a depth of 1 foot below grade. Then they'll be covered with native soil and then revegetated.
Okay. So that would be covered by the removal bond in the event that for some reason the site were abandoned?
Correct.
Okay. And how long does that removal bond last?
It's for the life of the agreement with the landowner.
Okay, very good. So the next item I wanted to raise with you, it concerns public safety. There's a statement in the select board's intervention that the main purpose of the tower is to provide cell service to the traveling public along this remote and dangerous state highway. And there, you understand which highway is being referred to there?
I do, Route 100, yes.
Route 100, okay. And so is that statement of the main purpose for the project correct?
That is correct.
As far as you know, has there ever been reliable service in Granville, in the Granville Gulf? I should say, not Granville. Right. So this map that I know we've talked about, this comes from the Vermont Telecommunications Authority from 2009, correct?
Correct.
And what's it basically showing?
That there is a significant gap in coverage on Route 100.
Along the, including in the Granville Gulf.
Including the Granville Gulf, correct,
Okay.
yes.
So in assessing the public safety and whether to move forward with the site, has AT&T looked into whether there's accident or crash data for Vermont Route 100?
Yes.
And what did you find from reviewing the data?
So between the dates of February 9th, 1992 and March 31st of 2021, so that's basically the time frame when cell phones sort of came to fruition and to the present. There have been 77 motor vehicle accidents in Granville. We also looked at how many accidents occurred during the winter, which we did between November and April, and 42 of them took place between that time frame, or about 50%, 55% of the accidents occurred within the winter months, and that was just accidents.
Okay. How about fatalities?
There were 3 fatalities between that time period.
And that data that you looked at, that came from VTrans, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that doesn't cover things like vehicle breakdowns, right? That as opposed to actual recorded traffic accidents or vehicle accidents?
Correct.
As far as you know? Okay. So in your experience, does cell service improve the likelihood that a person in a car crash or a vehicle breakdown is going to get help from first responders?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
And based on your experience managing the FirstNet project for AT&T, is public safety along Vermont Route 100 the reason the state directed AT&T to build this site, as far as you know?
Yeah, yes. And, we cannot say that cell coverage would have saved 3 lives or prevented any of the accidents. But with cell coverage in Granville, anyone with a cell phone would be able to make an emergency call to safety instead of waiting for a passerby or walking to the nearest residence. And during an emergency situation, first responders will have uninterrupted access so that they can communicate quickly and effectively to those in need.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Sure.
So I'm going to switch now to speaking with Sohail Usmani, who's with C Squared Systems. But Sohail, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. So Sohail, as you know, the town in its intervention expresses concern about the signal strength of the new AT&T site for purposes of covering Route 100 through the Granville Gulf to the Warrentown line. And they focused on a report from the department's consultant stating that the signal will be intermittent and discontinuous. You're familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So I'd like to start by asking you this in sort of general terms. In assessing whether cell coverage in an area is sufficient, can you explain the difference between predictive coverage and a drive test?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, what's the difference between predictive coverage that you'll typically do, like you did in this case, to try to predict coverage versus running an actual drive test?
Okay. The short answer is that the two should match, because the predicted coverage is done using computer models and terrain data, elevation data, clutter, height of the transmitters, power, antenna types, and all the other things that combine together to come up with a prediction. So in this case, 176 feet antenna height or center line of the antenna, and the power used, and with the morphology, the terrain, everything combined, you see what the colors represented by green as a -108 dBm coverage in the coverage maps.
Okay, so explain what so is it safe to say predictive coverage done with software, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And then the drive test is different. Can you describe how the drive test was done here?
So the drive test in this case was done by using a balloon float. So because the location was inaccessible by the crane size, 176 feet, in order to attain that height, you would need a very large crane, and that was not possible, I think, because of the access issues so the next best option was to use a large balloon, attach a test transmitter with a battery backup that could last 3 to 4 hours. I arranged that myself, so I know the details of this. And so the balloon is floated at the requested height, in this case 176 feet. The transmitter is turned on, and then the engineer jumps in the car and drives a predetermined drive route. They try to cover most of the roads extending out from the predicted coverage in order to be able to verify that with the drive data as well. In this case, our focus was mainly Route 100, and I told the engineer to make sure that he covers everything along Route 100 and anything that's branching out of it.
Okay. What's the unit of measurement that's used to determine coverage?
It's called a decibel or dBm.
And it's generally recognized in the field, right, of RF engineering?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And does a lower negative number, it's measured in negative numbers, correct?
That's right.
So a lower negative number means less coverage, just generally speaking?
Yes, so if you're close to a cell site or a base station or near a transmitter, you would typically get somewhere in the range of -40 dBm, which is considered to be very good, or that's as good as you can get. And as you move farther away, depending on the clutter and the terrain, that would diminish and attenuate, and you'd get, if you're really at the edge of the cell, before you drop out of the cell coverage area, like at the very boundary, you would see coverage thresholds in the range of -108, -110 dBm, or even lower. You may not be able to originate a call, or you may drop the call if you're already on a call, but those are the levels that you would see.
Okay, so safe to say, drive test is to measure coverage in the real world as opposed to a software determination. Okay,
that is correct.
And it's true that even Mr. Maxon has recognized that drive tests are reliable means of testing signal strengths against predictive maps.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Now, we know that within the Granville Gulf, okay, this stretch of highway going all the way up to the town of Warren line, that there's no residences or buildings, at least on that road, correct? Or that AT&T is trying to serve?
Right, as you can see on the map on the right-hand side, the yellow color in between and the zeros, they show that there's no
That zero represents there's no
No.
buildings or residences there.
no population count.
Okay, very good. So safe to say that we're really focused on outdoor vehicle coverage only in this along Route 100, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now in your pre-file testimony, you talk about providing coverage capability for first responders who are subscribing to FirstNet, as well as AT&T customers using cell phones. So that's two separate sets of users, correct?
That's correct.
They're using the same network, but they're basically two buckets of users.
That's right.
Okay, so let's start first with FirstNet, which is the service that's dedicated to use by first responders. Can you explain what HPUE is and when it's used?
HPUE stands for High Power User Equipment, as the name suggests. It has the ability to be operated at higher power than a regular cell phone. It has a different class of power, and the regular transmit power is plus 23 dBm, whereas the HPUE is different class at 31 dBm, and that additional dB of transmit power, helps increase coverage range in the suburban and rural areas. And if it's in building, then you get more signal penetration, that additional power.
And it really involves, as this chart is showing, it really involves installing an antenna, an HPUE antenna on a vehicle, correct?
That's right.
Right. So would that be like a police car, fire engine, dump truck,
Public
something like
safety.
that?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And so what's the lowest signal strength at which HPUE will operate effectively, according to AT&T?
It can go as low as minus 122 dBm.
Okay. And what was the lowest signal strength that was used in C-squared's drive test in the Granville Gulf?
It was minus 118.
Okay. So we're going to, we'll get to that, but that negative 118 is what we're using to basically assess the coverage for FirstNet, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now let's talk about the AT&T customers, a typical cell phone user who's subscribing to AT&T. What's the typical measurement used by AT&T to assess the quality of in-vehicle or outdoor coverage for a 4G, let's say a 4G LTE user?
It's minus 110 dBm.
Right, or usually AT&T's is a little higher than that, right? Isn't it normally negative 108? I think that was the one that you prepared.
Oh, for presentation and design purposes, it is minus 108 dBm.
Yeah. But will a cell phone work at 110?
But it will work, and I can explain to you, depending on where you are, and it's radio frequency signals and reflection. Due to reflection, you can sustain a call. You may drop due to some clutter in the way that may block the signal. If you're traveling at minus 108, minus 110 dBm, you may be able to maintain the call.
Okay, so using that using minus 110 as a threshold for the AT&T customers, and negative 118 dBm for HPUE users subscribing to FirstNet, I want to look with you at a combination of what those predictive tests and the drive test results show for the Granville Gulf. So we've kind of divided up the highway into 11 separate sections, starting down basically at the junction between Route 100 and Post Office Hill Road, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so on this side of the page, this is what AT&T's coverage is today. Is that correct? The existing
Coverage, yes.
existing coverage. And what does the green represent here?
The green represents signal RSRP levels at -110 dBm.
Right. So this is basically our AT&T cell phone user.
That's right. Yes.
And then minus this, what does the brown represent on here?
The brown is anything up to -118 or better, which is the HPUE.
Yep. And so this shows the existing coverage that exists today, correct? On the left.
That's correct.
And then on the right is with the proposed site.
Yes, sir.
And really, to the average person, there's really not much difference between these two as far as the predictive coverage is concerned. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So now, in these pictures, we do not show any drive test data, right? These are just the predictions?
That's correct.
Okay. So then I take it this is the drive test data that you produced, correct?
That's the drive test data overlaid on the coverage threshold of -118 dBm. Yes, sir.
So it's a combination of with the predictive coverage and existing coverage, as well as with the drive test data brought in.
That's right.
Okay. And so this, again, we're looking at the brown dots right now. So that's FirstNet HPUE.
Yes, so wherever you see the brown dots or orange or brown, whichever color you see, that represents a threshold of -118 dBm or better.
For our FirstNet users.
For HPUE users. Yes.
Okay, very good. And then here is the, this is the -110. This is our AT&T user, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so what's this showing? And specifically, this little section where there's basically the small black
dots are, because we're showing -110 dBm, anything below meaning, again, this is negative numbers. So below would be -111, 112 and upwards, weaker signal. And the black dots represent that there wasn't anything better than or equal to -110 dBm.
Okay.
So in essence, there's no coverage.
Now those below the threshold points, those are taking account of what the antenna on the balloon was doing, correct?
Yes, I do want to mention that. Yeah, that drive test data only picked up the coverage from the balloon, and the green existing coverage shown there also includes the current AT&T on-air sites.
So in other words, this green right here,
that's from the existing
rephrasing
sites.
That coverage already exists today if you're driving up Route 100.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up.
But now there, right here, that shows that like there may be a little gap right here, correct? Between where that existing coverage ends today and where the balloon test started to pick up new coverage?
Only slightly, because you do see existing coverage along the road.
Yeah.
So it's very slightly.
Is a user, an AT&T user who's going from here to there, right? Driving north or, from south to north along the road, likely to lose their phone call? Or let me put it this way, is it guaranteed that they're going to lose their phone call?
They may, they may not, because the way that phones are programmed in the system is that you don't instantly drop a call once you lose a signal, which is, let's say I design a site or a user to be carrying the call at, minimum -114 dBm. And so if the threshold falls to -115, 116 for it's very quick. You know, the decisions are made very quickly. And there's a timer that's set in the phones that it'll wait for an X amount of time, depending on how it's programmed. And it won't drop the call. It'll keep trying. And if you're moving in a vehicle and you come to a better coverage spot, then it'll reconnect that call.
Okay. Okay.
Just
So,
like you may have experienced in a WhatsApp application, it sends you tones and then
right,
it reestablishes the call.
when it reestablishes. Okay. So I'm looking at the second section. This is basically getting up to kind of a major, almost a hairpin turn on the Granville Gulf. And so again, this is showing what? That there is coverage today at both levels for part of it, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that with the new site, not a lot in terms of the predicted new coverage, correct?
Right.
Okay. And so now let's take a look at, again, the HPUE, and what does that show?
That shows that it's covered, or it will be covered.
That it will be continuous for a FirstNet user?
That's right.
Okay. What about for an AT&T user?
You may be able to carry the call because, you know, if you look at the zoom level of this slide, you see 0.1 or just about 0.1 mile of the road that you don't see covered with the existing or the drive data. And, you know, if the timer is set to wait that long, then you may reestablish that call.
Okay.
If you're
What about up here with this little below the threshold dot? We likely to be worried about?
I would
about that?
think that to be is very insignificant.
Okay, so this may be, this is really just going to depend on circumstances.
But I mean, you do have the green from your existing coverage along Route 100.
Right. Okay.
So you can, you know, you may disregard the black dots going down all the way.
Okay. So then another section, third section of the Gulf, you come around that pin and you start heading basically north-south. Existing coverage doesn't exist and showing no new proposed coverage here, correct?
That's right.
Okay. What did the drive test show for the FirstNet users?
That it's covered. It can carry the call.
Entirely.
Minus 118.
What about for the AT&T users?
Same. Also.
Okay, minus that one little dot here that you said you're not worried about.
Right.
Okay. Now just to try to speed things up a little bit. So here's a curve that kind of almost a slight S-shaped curve. This is the fourth section that we've identified. It shows no existing coverage, a little bit of new coverage here, but not a lot, correct?
That's right.
And then again, I'll start juxtaposing them. Any coverage concerns along this section for FirstNet?
No, they're all, both of them should be able to maintain a call.
Same with AT&T. How about this section running east and west, or almost east-west? No service today.
There's no service there.
And even predicted that there wouldn't be, except for maybe touches here and there, not much new service on that section of the road, correct?
Right, right.
And then what did the drive tests show at those thresholds?
Both covered. Both carry.
Both covered, right? Looks like there might be one little dot over here, correct? One below the threshold dot, or maybe one
Right.
here, but you're not concerned with that.
No.
Okay. At this point, it starts to bend north again. No coverage today. Here's the new coverage. This section shows as not being covered.
Mhm.
What does the drive test data show?
That is covered.
It's covered all the way through,
Both,
correct?
in both the slides.
On both slides. So for both sets of users, this is what I call the wishbone here, where 100 starts to meet up with North Hollow Road. No coverage today, showing predictive coverage being strong, at least on the upper part, but nothing kind of right where it comes up, correct?
That's right.
And then anything to be concerned with on either of these?
It's well covered.
Okay. So that's the 7th section of the Gulf. Is that what we call the 8th section? This is when it starts running north-south, no existing coverage, very strong predicted coverage in this section, correct?
Yes.
And so any concerns on either of these
No,
slides?
they should maintain the call.
Okay. What I call the 9th section, again, north-south, similar, but right here, there's this gap, at least on the predicted coverage, correct?
That's right.
Any concerns based on the drive test data?
No. They should carry the call.
Okay. And now we get to the penultimate, the 10th section. This, it starts to basically, the highway starts to bend again, and you have Plunkton Road up here. This is more or less the town line, or the Warren Granville boundary line. Definitely some predicted coverage along here, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what does this section show for FirstNet?
That it's covered.
That it's covered basically all the way past Plunkton Road, correct?
That's right. Yes.
What about for the AT&T user?
It's spotty up till Plunkton Road. You have, if you're driving from south to north into Warren, you may start to see or experience crackle, and as you enter or you go past Plunkton Road or Plunkton, you may end up dropping the call.
Okay. So right here, if I'm driving north, at this point, I'm not going to regain, I'm not likely to regain a signal.
Unless you have something farther north.
Right. Okay.
It would most likely end up in a drop call.
Yeah. And then this last section, which is basically a stretch that goes to a stretch, almost an east-west stretch, getting to the town line.
There's no coverage there.
Right. That's predicted. And that's what the drive test results showed as well, correct?
That's right.
Right. So FirstNet, even the FirstNet users will trail off in this section.
Yeah, a threshold of -118.
Yep. And then AT&T user, really nothing at all for that section. So that,
right.
Okay. Okay. So safe to say that with the drive test, does it establish that an AT&T user is going to have reliable coverage, at least for basic cell service, for voice through the Gulf?
Yes, for most part.
And is that true for text as well? Could you send a text with that 110 signal strength?
Yes.
Okay. And what about somebody who's not an AT&T customer trying to dial 911? Will they be able to do that at that signal level?
911 calls take preference, even if you don't have a working phone or a SIM card in your phone and you press 911, that call should go through.
Okay. So based on your experience, is there any reason to believe that the drive test results would be dramatically different with leaf-on conditions?
It depends on the type of trees and the density of the trees. If there's mostly deciduous trees, then there will be some attenuation of the signal due to the denseness. And again, if there's more coniferous trees out there, then we've already accounted for those in our drive data. But if, again, depends on how many trees and how thick growth there is, and there will be some attenuation of the signal will be degraded a little bit.
Mm-hmm. But even with that attenuation, isn't it possible that you're like what you were explaining before about the timing, that even if a gap emerges in one place, you're going to be able to reestablish the call if that duration is
yes.
short? Okay.
Yes.
And last question to you, any reason to believe that the height of the facility could be reduced down to 140, let's say, from 180 feet and still basically achieve what we're managing to achieve for coverage?
The terrain is so challenged in this area, especially, and the road is winding. You know, you have these hairpin curves, and I'd like to go higher if at all possible. But you know, if you go down, the chances of covering those bends, it reduces that possibility of that signal traveling in those tunnels. They're literally tunnels in those valleys.
Mhm. And if we were to go higher, if we were to go 20 feet higher, the tower would be lit, correct? At 200 feet?
That's right. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Sohail.
Oh, you're welcome.
So I'd like to speak with Janelle Smith, who's also with Centerline Communications and was responsible for most of the site acquisition work for Granville. Janelle, you're there, correct?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Hi, Will.
Okay, hi. So can you tell us a little bit about when AT&T commenced its due diligence for the FirstNet project?
Yes, approximately 2.5 years ago, or late 2018.
Okay. And let me ask you generally, the town in its intervention says that it's concerned about the aesthetic impact of a second Granville cell tower. Is aesthetics something that you can typically consider when you're looking for new sites?
Well, it's definitely something that I have in my checklist of things that I know are going to arise. So it's something that I definitely consider when I'm at the very outset. I sort of do a 10,000 foot broad scope of what is our goal here? What are the likely challenges here? What is the most probable chance of success?
Very good. So approximately how many different locations or candidates did AT&T consider over the course of the time period that you've worked on FirstNet?
They have considered approximately 25 candidates.
Okay, now we don't have time to go through all of those tonight, but can you describe in a few specific places some of the work or some of the things that you looked at, starting with the west side of Route 100 in Granville Gulf? Was anything done to look at a site there?
Yes, Green Mountain National Forest is someone we've worked with, and they require exhaustion of all of the private property owners before they will entertain an agreement with a carrier.
Okay, so they said we won't even consider it unless you've exhausted other alternatives.
That is correct.
Okay. So what about other state properties, public properties, and in particular, any work that you did with with any Vermont agencies? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. First, Parks and Recreation, Granville Reservation. We specifically did look at a number of the local state parks because this is part of the preservation corridor. And there would be some potential coverage success by locating on some of the state parks. However, there's a caveat, and that is the state parks will not allow us to build access roads because we couldn't get to the locations that we need to get to on the high ridge of the mountains.
Okay, and just because you broke up a little bit there, just to repeat what you said. So the state expressed concerns about building new access roads to reach the places where RF accepted. Is that accurate?
Yes, in fact, that's accurate. And in fact, they would prohibit the construction of access roads to those locations at the top of the ridges.
So that basically leaves out all this kind of light green area of the Granville State Reservation State Forest, correct?
Yes, and there's also the practical ability to get utilities there as well.
And same goes for Roxbury State Forest up here, if we were to try to put something over here on the edge.
That is right. That is the same conclusion and the same caveats.
Okay. So now what about a couple of the timber parcels in the vicinity, right? There's a couple, there's the Aramo parcel where the tower's located. Did you look at the Montgomery timber parcel?
Yes, we contacted a number of private property owners here. And this was not a secret that Granville Gulf needed coverage. So before AT&T even got on board, some of these timber companies had done deals with or considered work with private tower companies as well. So yes, we contacted directly the timber companies and several private property owners. And in addition to that, we worked with some established tower companies who had been digging around in the area for years before as well.
I see. Okay. The Green Crow parcel you also looked at, was that another, since that's a pretty large parcel on the edge?
Actually, yes, we did. And the problem with actually both of these properties, the Montgomery Timber and Green Crow, is getting there, building the access roads. We would have needed to do an incredible amount of tree felling, and we did not have the benefit of an access road. Now, the golden ticket would be if we could potentially find access to an existing parcel or existing access road, which is what brought us to the Aramos. We also consulted with the Agency of Natural Resources and looked closely at forest blocks and other sorts of sensitive or protected resources, and concluded that we would have the least impact if we were to go on an existing access road and work on the Aramos property.
So since this proceeding has began, since we filed the 60-day notice, has anyone, any agencies or individuals reached out to you with an alternative parcel and a willing landowner that was accepted by the engineering team?
Well, that's, yes, briefly, Maxon or Isotrope did make some recommendations based on a desktop scrub. We run into the same problem that we run into with our first scrub, is that we can't build access roads here without impacting the natural resources. And it was concluded by A&R that we would have more impacts on the natural resources if we were to go to any of those other resources. They were also inferior from an RF coverage standpoint. So
most of those were, safe to say, kind of up in this area of the Gulf?
that is correct. We were looking more north than south because there is more reliable coverage in the lower terrains because of the existing tower. So our search was the Aramos, slightly south and a bit north.
Okay, so talking about that, in terms of where the project is located on the Aramo parcel, can you describe briefly why that original location was moved? And I think you can refer to this.
I will. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt the questioning. Just to make sure, mindful of the time here, just make sure we have enough time for the question and comments.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep, we'll go quick.
Okay, just quickly then, we moved the original location very slightly, maybe a couple hundred feet at the request of the southern property owner, Gagnon, who indicated he may build a cabin directly over the property line and did not want to look at a tower immediately outside of his window. So we moved it back a bit.
Yeah, about 200 feet?
Yeah, about that. We had to run the new coordinates by RF. Sometimes a small shift makes a big difference. Other times it does not, and here it did not. So we were able to satisfy that concern.
Okay. So now I'm going to ask you a question about tower designs. This is what I'm showing on the screen is the monopole design that we showed in the simulation. Has there been any thought given to alternate tower designs?
Yes, we're looking at lattice tower, which allows light to go through.
Okay, is that a lattice tower on the screen?
That's right.
Okay, and what else?
Possibly a monopine.
Right, this is a monopine simulation.
Right, so some people think it looks better because it looks more like a tree. Some people think it looks ridiculous because no tree looks that large, but this is a subjective, this may be subjective. In any event, AT&T is open to discussing design if there's a consensus on what may be the best looking design. They're absolutely willing to entertain that.
So just to describe a bit more of what you're saying, this is a monopole, a tapered lattice. You see a little bit less of it, even though it's thicker, at least from a farther distance. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Yeah, and then the monopine has kind of the thickest at all, but in the right setting, it can actually, sometimes it blends and sometimes it doesn't, correct?
Sure. I'm not going to make a judgment call on this, but again, open to any consensus the town may have.
Is there anything further that AT&T is doing in terms of looking at mitigation?
Yes, they've started talking to a landscape architect to think about this in a new light, maybe think outside the box in ways that the aesthetic impact can be mitigated. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Eric, I think in light of the time concern that you expressed, I will have Louis Hodgetts available to answer questions about construction if it comes up, but I agree that we should move to the Q&A section.
Okay, great, thank you. So what we will do is have anyone who is currently on Zoom on a computer or tablet and is able to do the raise hand function and who wishes to ask myself from the department or Will for AT&T any questions, if you would raise your hand at this time. And then I will ask for anyone who's on the phone and is unable to raise their hand if anyone will speak up as far as any questions go. So I do have first wanted to get to Judy Wood, who indicated before the meeting a request to ask questions along with possibly questions from her consultant. So Judy, are you there? Just want to.
I am.
Okay. If you would like to go ahead and ask your questions, you can.
Well, when those drive test results were issued, a couple of us did a little research about cell signal strength to better understand the actual data. And we learned about DBMs and bars, and we were able to make an amateur interpretation of the drive test maps. And it seemed that what the maps showed did not match the coverage claims made by Mr. Dodge and Mr. Usmani. At that same time, we were communicating with a totally independent RF engineer out in Arizona who was kind enough to review all the drive test maps and accompanying documents. We continued communicating with him, and his name is Marv Wessel. He is the CEO and founder of Global RF Solutions, and he's here today gratis to offer some of his expert take on the drive test results and AT&T's projected coverage of the Granville Gulf. Marv, are you there? Oh, Brooke has raised her hand.
If I could just jump in just for a minute before Marv speaks. I represent Jeff Gladson, and I just had a couple really brief questions about the presentation on the coverage. And if I could just ask a couple questions and have Will or his expert respond, that would be helpful. First of all, I was wondering in terms of the drive. I'm sorry, I should have turned on my video. In terms of the drive test, can you describe what methodology was used? And I understand there was some transmitter on the balloon, but in terms of the actual receivers on the cars that were driven or car, was that an apparatus that was affixed to the outside of the vehicle or was it in the interior of the vehicle? That's one question that we have that I would like to know. And then the other question is with regard to the difference between on-leaf and off-leaf conditions. I think we didn't really get an answer to what Will was asking his expert. He said some degrading of the signal. I think that this is a very standard number that is well known in the industry. And I think that he should be able to speak to an actual quantification of the diminution in the signal, because these drive tests apparently were taken all during the winter, not during leaf-on conditions, and this is a very deciduous rich area. And in fact, when the expert talked about the tunnels, that's in fact exactly what you experience in the summertime when you drive in this area, is that you drive through tunnels with tree canopy above you, that many areas are completely isolated and would not be able to receive that. So I'd like to know what his number is in terms of his signal strength and how that relates to all those maps that we just looked at, all of those calls that might not drop. Is that a guarantee that they're not going to drop? And also if he could speak to the issue of if a dropped call is different, if you're in the area where you're in the dead zone, can you make a call to 911? That's really more important than whether or not there's a dropped call when you happen to be talking to somebody. So if those three questions could be answered, I think that would be really useful before Marv speaks to the issue.
So Brooke, I'm fine with Sohail answering the question about the antenna, but with respect to a standard that you're claiming is out there in the ether for us to see that we haven't seen, then I'm not gonna, I don't want the witness to answer that question. And with respect to whether you can still make a call in a dead spot, I think Sohail's already basically addressed that. But Sohail, why don't you answer the question regarding the receiver?
The test phone was inside the vehicle and there was a mag mount antenna on the roof of the car.
I'm sorry, what type of antenna?
It's a mag mount, magnetic.
And what impact does that have on the signal strength that's being tested?
There's no gain, and you know, we collect the data and then we manipulate that to match whatever the cell site will transmit, an actual AT&T cell site will transmit.
Okay, but what I'm trying to understand is where is the signal being received? On this antenna on the outside of the car or by the cell phone inside the car itself?
Whatever we displayed will be the experience inside the vehicle.
Okay, let me ask the question again. The data that you're collecting was from the roof of the vehicle and then you're manipulating the data to equate to as if it was inside the vehicle, is that right?
The minus 110 dBm is the threshold that you see will be for outdoor coverage, yes.
And how much attenuation is there?
That's a technical question that requires more, you know, it's not a simple answer.
Okay, how about typical car attenuation?
But I mean, Brooke, this is not the type of equipment that's on a typical car. If you'd like us to get you an answer to that question, Sohail can look into it.
I mean, what I'm trying to understand, Will, is, you know, this
I think we
gentleman-
understand your theory, Brooke, which is that there's a problem because the antenna was on the car, not in the car.
Yeah,
And
okay.
we understand the point completely, and we will be able to address that.
Great. And then can we just see if he has a number in terms of the answer he gave you where there would be some difference with leaf on conditions? Does he have a number that would be typical or the regular standard? Like -6 dB, maybe?
I don't see how that could possibly be, given that you have to look at the trees, where the trees are and what kind of trees there are. Yes, there's a lot of deciduous, but there's also a lot of coniferous right on the side of the road. So
Okay,
that
so
may
then
have been taken into account already.
okay, well, so my question is it fair to say that all of the results and the maps and all of the opinion that has been provided is based on leaf-off conditions, the testing and the modeling, period, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, we got it, thanks.
Well, the modeling is not leaf off.
Yes, I'm sorry, you're right. The modeling is not, but the drive test is.
Drive test.
Gotcha, thank you.
And bear in mind, Brooke, that there's no difference between that predictive, when we're showing where existing coverage is, that does not depend on winter versus summer.
Oh, and yeah, and let me ask you about that existing coverage. Was there any powering down of any signals before the baseline signals were taken in terms of establishing that established coverage mapping area? Because I understand from several of the residents in the area that there has been an alteration in the cell signals shortly before the testing was done. And there is some concern about that. Is there a way to verify what the typical signals are in the past versus when you did the tests?
So Hale, you can answer whether you are aware of any type of shutdown or.
I'm not aware of anything like that.
Is there a way to find that out from AT&T, whether that happened or not?
You know, I suppose there might be, but it's rather doubtful. But sir, we can ask the question.
Okay.
Okay. So I think Judy had indicated a question or a few questions from Mr. Wessel.
Okay, am I unmuted?
We can hear you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I just want to say, after reviewing a lot of this, a lot of the data and listening, there seems to be an awful lot of subjectivity going around. You know, when it comes to tuning models, you know, a great deal of effort goes into tuning models, yet they don't almost never establish what actual coverage is like. AT&T, most companies, wireless, have extensive quality teams that go out and tune the models. They don't do it so much anymore with MIMOs. The networks tend to tune themselves. But yeah, after doing this for several decades, I don't think I've ever seen a predicted model match what actual empirical data is. And I just want to say there's an awful lot of subjectivity here. I'm going to let some other people maybe ask some questions. I'll listen more than talk.
I don't see any hands raised right now. Let's see. Oh, Judy, I see you raised your hand. You want to go ahead and ask your questions?
Yeah, the maps, the maps with all the dots that were shown this evening are not at all the same maps that were published in the drive test. Why is that?
So they actually are the same maps. They're simply blown up to show the data at a much more granular level. Is that
They're not-
correct, Sohail? Can you confirm that?
The color key and color codes are very different.
Well, but they're not different at all in the sense that what we're showing on the maps that we showed tonight, and which we will include with our next submission, is a minimum threshold level. One for FirstNet and one for AT&T users. That's why. And again, as I explained, or as Sohail explained during the presentation, there are parts where those signals will be much higher than -118 or -110. But what we wanted to demonstrate to counter the concern about coverage being intermittent and discontinuous is that there's a minimum level of coverage for both sets of users virtually all the way through the Gulf.
So Eric, this is Brooke
Okay.
again.
Yeah.
If I could just maybe ask Marv, is it, if he might be able to speak to what we've seen tonight in terms of the coverage and the reports, I believe that he's read, which are not only this one, but the expert from DPS. If Marv might be able to speak to that, that would be very helpful, I think, for the community members who are very concerned that this really does not seem to add much of anything to coverage in the Gulf. And if Marv has an opinion about the reports that have been generated and how he might see it the same or different, that would be useful, I think, if he might be willing to do that.
We can have Mr. Wessel speak. I just wanted to make sure we run through any questions, beforehand, just to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to ask any questions from the department or AT&T. It doesn't look like there are any more. And I don't see anyone on a phone line. So
I'm on a phone line, and I'd appreciate
okay.
to hear Marv's insight. Thank you.
Okay. If there are no more questions at this time, we can go ahead and let Mr. Wessel speak. Just to, I want to note that the public comment for this hearing is for comments that the department, not the commission, will be considering in its own recommendation. This is a separate period of comment from the public comments that are written to the commission through the EPUC, or public comments made to the commission or hearing officer at a commission public hearing. So I just want to make sure everyone is clear on that any comments made here will not be expressed to the commission. So this is exclusively for the department and the applicant. I do see Stacy Peters. Stacy, do you have a question or is it a comment?
It is a comment.
Okay.
Thank you, Sohail, and to Will for the magnified view up along the corridor. That really clarified expectations for me. I wanted to know actually if I see some members of the Granville Select Board on the call. I know they may want to take it offline and come back as a consensus, but I wanted to know if their concerns that they brought up in their interjection were answered sufficiently tonight, or if there are any outstanding questions along the lines that they mentioned, if they feel like anything is still outstanding. And again, Rachel and Bruce, I don't mean to put you on the spot, so feel free to tell me to buzz off until next time. Thank you.
This is Bruce Hyde.
Hi, Bruce.
Yeah, Stacy, at this point, we're here listening to the hearing and the evidence being provided. We'll certainly have to go back as a select board and take a look at it. But we certainly, I think that the questions that we've raised that are in the record are being directed at, but I'm not going to go any further and say whether, we can accept those results. I think there's still some more time that we have to become more educated too.
Definitely. I just wanted to make sure that the questions were being answered. Thanks for that.
Okay, thank you. And so, Mr. Wessel, if you would like to go ahead and speak.
Okay, so I've basically reviewed a lot of the testimonies and a lot of the reports that that everybody has opportunities to look at. The drive test that I reviewed, much more coarse data than the data that was presented tonight. And that test was done on 1/13/2021. Well, I'm looking at a testimony of Mr. Usami, and it's dated March 23rd of 2021. And he says the facility will provide, so I'm assuming he reviewed the drive data and calibrated everything in his model. He says only approximately 1.2 miles of new outdoor coverage along Vermont Route 100 through Granville Gulf is all that this site's going to add. And outdoor coverage is the lowest quality of coverage that a wireless carrier would consider. So I heard tonight that we've got all this coverage to the Gulf. It seems to conflict with the testimony that was presented on March 23rd. Then the Isotrope Wireless also has a report, and he's reviewed this extensively, it appears too. A little bit confusing, some of his testimony, but he does make points that the coverage is going to be more reliable in the test. And I don't understand how that can be, because they're calibrating the model to the test. Empirical data is always more accurate than assumptions with unknowns. So I don't understand some of that, but it says there's enough differences between the CW test. This is all from the Isotrope report again. Between the CW test performed and the actual conditions that the map of the CW test should be ignored. I don't understand, he's saying to ignore the tests that were done CW wise, and we just watched several slides talking about CW test. He says the CW test is also performed in winter with deciduous trees out of leaf. In summer, the vegetation absorbs more of the signal. That is true. Dr. Lee has a number that he puts out there, and that's a -6 at a 45-degree angle through deciduous. Because of these two measurement biases, the CW test must be regarded as optimistic, tending to overstate the coverage obtained from that location and height. We would also have to remember that an antenna placed on the roof of a vehicle is probably about a meter higher than the person sitting in the car that would be trying to use the phone. 1 meter can make a big difference in the test. So there's just some of the things that I've observed, looking at the materials that are posted and available, and tonight's presentation of the drive test is certainly a lot different than what I've been able to view. And the numbers that have been put out there are what I would consider very optimistic numbers, attenuation and signal level wise. The RSRP values for industry, anything below -100 is considered very weak and would be very questionable to be able to initiate or maintain a phone call. So those are some of the things I've noted, and again, I'll jump off and let somebody else maybe think about something and ask any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wessel. I don't see any hands raised, so I just want to see if there are any more comments or even questions from anyone here. I see Brooke has raised her hand. If you would like to go ahead and speak, you can.
Yeah, so I just really wanted to ask Mr. Wessel if he believes that either of these two expert tests are credible, and accurate and should be relied upon by the Public Utility Commission, or whether or not he believes that, for example, he or some other expert might be able to provide a more rational, better grounded opinion in the methodologies that are accepted and given the extremely significant terrain challenges that we have here.
Well, I would say that, oh, go ahead. This is Marv Wessel again. I would say that based on the isotopes reports, some of it I would concur with, and that this test that's been performed, it's got a bunch of questionable coverage items. Based on what I've heard tonight, as far as this, all these claims of this contiguous coverage, just doesn't appear to have any proof. I would probably say that a better test be performed, possibly something that could actually measure bit error rate. I don't know if they've got the capability to do that with their test equipment. CW testing is pretty crude when it comes to digital communications. All communications from wireless sites are digital now. There is no more analog phone calls. It doesn't exist anymore. It hasn't existed for quite some time. So the true test is how well can you transmit data and have a bit error rate that's satisfactory to complete a call or data. So I would say that certainly, better testing could be done, and most likely I would like to see testing with deciduous leaf-on conditions. Dr. Lee his papers, out there for anybody to review, and negative 6 dB is quite typical, and maybe even generous. We don't know. There's a lot of deciduous trees in this area. The angle of intercept is going to be quite high. You're actually trying to look into a canyon. There isn't going to be much reflection. In the West, we get multipathing off of rock canyon walls quite easily. We don't have a lot of vegetation. Signals, trick the models quite often. We get coverage in places you'd never believe. So I believe that we should probably consider having someone else take a look at a better test, something that would be able to either prove or disprove some of these claims that I believe are extremely optimistic tonight.
Mr. Wessel, in terms of, I guess, 1.2 miles of outdoor coverage? What's that term that they use?
Outdoor coverage that's the lowest level of coverage. That means you are out of a vehicle. Vehicles, depending on the manufacturer of the vehicle, attenuation levels can vary greatly, including where you place the phone in the vehicle. Some people have cup holders, dash holders. That's why it was probably a hard question to answer when it was asked of him. Mr. Asami couldn't answer because he's correct. There's extreme variables that happen, and putting an antenna on top of a roof of a car is what I would consider the best case for making measurements, obviously.
So then it's fair to say then that the degradation of the signal, just in terms of being inside the car versus an antenna on top, would alter significantly the coverage that's predicted from this new tower. Is that fair to say?
Yes, most drive testing, when they do drive test for quality, they don't use external antennas to do that. They use drive test phones. So it's an actual phone. Typically, they put multiple phones in a mounting apparatus that would simulate where a user would do it, and then they drive for quality. It's a much more accurate way of determining quality of coverage than doing predictions and doing CW testing. CW testing is a very crude, rudimentary way to test the system's performance before it's built. CW testing is much better than models, though. I didn't see anywhere where I saw the accuracy of the terrain and clutter data that was utilized for the test. For very accurate testing, LiDAR can be used to obtain extremely accurate data and tree and foliage and clutter data. I have no idea what was used for this testing and for providing these plots. When it comes to prediction plots, the manipulation of the data and I guess we'll call them the knobs on the tool for making adjustments. There's a huge variation in outcomes of the predicted models based on how the knobs have been turned, and it's just that simple. It relies on the skill of the user. I'm assuming that the user here is skilled, but I can't confirm that because I haven't seen it done and I don't have any data to back that up. So
it's kind of like my father-in-law used to say, I don't trust any statistics that I haven't manipulated myself.
that's a pretty accurate way to say it.
Okay.
You do have a hand there, so.
Yeah, I was just going to see if we can move on to Jude and Ethan. See your hand is raised.
Yes, hi, thank you. I hear that, so a lot of questions about the effectiveness of this tower and whether it will achieve or perform at some level, I guess. And I guess my question is there interest in more effectiveness? If there was more effectiveness of this tower, would people be in favor of it? And if so, would people be in favor of more towers along Route 100 if that would produce better coverage? Is that sort of part of the reasoning here?
The question to anybody specifically?
I'll jump in because I'll always talk. This is Brooke. I think the point is, why is this tower being sited here if it's really not going to do anything? Because one of the things that the Public Utility Commission needs to decide is this in the public good?
And I'm sure that the 3 fatalities on that road might disagree with you, as well as all of the car crashes and all of the data that we've shown. This is not an academic.
I'm happy to get into that on cross-examination, because so what that you have some absolute numbers of something that happened? What are the grades that VTrans gives to that area? Is it a high traffic accident area? Just giving 7 or whatever accidents in whatever time period is completely meaningless data.
Except that we all know from our own human experience that having an accident on a road and not having cell service or trying to rely on a public safety officer who doesn't have coverage on a particular road and can't communicate is a serious public safety issue. That's why we're here. So we're just not going to accept the idea that somehow this is on a whim or this is something that we're doing to try to antagonize, which is what the suggestion is. The reason that we are here to try to solve a very serious issue in terms of the need for first responders' safety as well as for the public. If there is another site, we have many times looked for them and tried to find a place that's more acceptable to the community. What is very difficult about this particular location are all the constraints that Janelle went through and explained in some detail in terms of alternative places that you could put a single tower to cover this very difficult, challenging piece of terrain.
Well, and I agree with you, Will. But if a landowner doesn't want to put a tower on their property, they don't want to put a tower on their property. So that's a constraint. So I understand.
Well, very graciously allowed us to do this, to consider this, notwithstanding the opposition and some of the things that have been printed or said about them. So we're grateful for them for that. And we understand, let me just finish. We understand that.
I don't know, Will, you seem to be very condescending to the public and interruptive. So I'm going to interrupt you for the moment. I've worked trauma for many years, and of course, no family wants to go through that. We haven't looked at the other side then, for not covering 1.5 miles is still significant. And then for those who will start using the cell coverage, you know, increasing the number of accidents, we haven't looked at that side either, but I would appreciate a little bit of a difference in your tone. Thank you.
Okay.
And if I could just follow up, Eric, to just complete the thought, if you don't mind.
Sure. I do want to limit the sort of arguments. This is intended to serve as an informational hearing, so I do want to keep it that way and reserve any contested issues for an actual hearing before the commission. So.
No, I understand. All I wanted to just follow up with Will and his comment is to say, and what I was trying to explain is that the PUC has a responsibility to decide if something is in the public good. And so it's not 5 miles like we were told originally of better coverage. It's only 1.2. And in fact, in the actual Gulf, there's no coverage, nor will there be. The location of that tower, sure, you looked at other sites. If it was just on the western side of the ridge that you've cited it on, it wouldn't need to be 180 feet tall, because the only reason why it has to be that tall is because it has to peek over the ridge. So I get that there were other options looked at, but there weren't other options. And this is where you guys ended up. And I understand that. But that does not mean just because it's the only place available for a cell tower that the Public Utility Commission is not going to determine whether or not the coverage that is enhanced here is worth the price that everyone else has to pay, whether it's from aesthetics, whether it's from the economic harm. But the last thing I just wanted to throw out besides that, I just wanted to explain to the question as to why this is, you know, if the coverage was better, would it be okay? Well, maybe it would be for the Public Utility Commission, because when they weigh those two things, you know, how important is this and what benefit does it really provide versus whether or not it's worth the cost. And that balance has to be decided by the PUC. That's why the coverage issue is important. That's why the data is important. That's why how they collected the data is important, so that it's not garbage in and garbage out. So that when we see an actual map, that's what the situation's going to be. Not, oh, that's only, you know, 50% of the year when there aren't any leaves on the trees. Oh, and we were enthusiastic and we overestimated those numbers. And that's what the future evidentiary hearing is going to be about, where we get the opportunity to actually find out, how did you figure out these numbers, whether or not they hold water? So I think that Mr. Wessel's comments were really helpful to lay people to understand what it is that is trying to be figured out, how it's being figured out, and then whether or not the results that we're looking at from whoever they're coming from are in fact reliable. The very last thing I just want to add is AT&T hasn't talked about either site control or site access. I understand that there is an access issue that is now going to be going to court. And so I'm surprised that they didn't discuss that issue today, but that is a big concern and should be to the town and everyone else. If in fact they don't have the property interests, the private property interests that allow them to run utility lines up an easement that they don't have to go there, or to traverse a road for commercial purposes. So that's the last comment that I have. Thanks.
So Eric, I'll just respond very briefly and say that first of all, to Ms. Warner, I certainly did not mean to sound condescending. We are concerned about these areas, and AT&T has gone through pains in many communities to try to work to ultimately find solutions that are agreeable and that work out best for the community, but ensure that there's reliable service. The thing that I will say briefly about the access issue is simply that we are aware of the court action. It's not a matter that's jurisdictional in any way to the Public Utility Commission. And so that'll be addressed separately, but our position is that we have sufficient legal rights to access the Aramo property over the Glashan property. I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you. So I think we have a couple of new hands. I think I saw Stacy Peters first, so I will. Is Stacy? Are you there?
I'm here. I'll be very brief. I took a quick look at the crash data report, the dashboard from VTrans that you linked to early in the presentation, and it does look like back of envelope about 75 to perhaps 80% of those accidents in the corridor have of course happened in winter months, which is what we would expect. My interest in this is as a parent who sends her daughter up the Gulf to go to school. I'm also chair of our local school board, so I can tell you all that about 20 to 25% of our school children do travel up the Gulf every morning in the winter months to go to school. So that's a stat that I wanted to share with you. And of course, as mentioned, that's only those that are reported to VTrans or to the Vermont State Police. I've been in accidents on that corridor and not told a word out of embarrassment. But you know, to this question of the public good, I am mostly concerned about making sure that people who are stuck on that road, especially in the cold winter months, have the access that they need. Less concerned about people's ability to send a text message. Thanks.
Thank you. And I see Catherine has her hand up.
Yeah, I actually just want to echo, I didn't know that it seemed to me that nobody was speaking about the safety issue. And Stacy has just voiced it. I myself have had 2 children who've had serious accidents in the Gulf, who were very lucky to have survived the accidents in the Gulf. I teach at one of those schools to the north. I drive through there every day, twice a day. And I feel like it's a little disingenuous for, I don't know where Brooke is from, and I guess that I do know that Mr. Wessel is from Arizona, but you're not living the reality of those of us who actually do that traverse on a daily basis. And I feel a little resentful that you're putting it in such adversarial tones when there is a real safety hazard here. It would be enough for me if this worked well for FirstNet. And it looks like that is actually well covered. So you know, we started out by talking about why we were here and what the objections were, and we seem to have lost track of this very, very important part of it, that this is also about safety. And that's what I have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I see that Judy, you have your hand up. Was that from the last time?
Yeah, but I do have something to say.
Okay.
And thank you. That is, I definitely understand the desire for safety in the Gulf. I think it's, but as I see it, from what I know and from the various tests and our little bit of research and Marv's expertise, there are enough doubts about what this tower would actually accomplish. And I think the claims have been exaggerated, but regardless, it boils down to a matter of how much improvement would there be versus how much negative impact it would have on those of us who are objecting to it. It's a balance, and that's why truly accurate predictions are so important, because if you have an accident in the Gulf, or you're just stuck, or say an accident, and you still have to search for a spot where you can make a call for help. I just can't see that the small gain is worth it. Considering that such a tower will be sticking up way above the ridge line and looming over many of us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I see Jude and Ethan raise their hand.
Hi, thank you. Another question I have is the existing tower in Granville. Do you know what amount of coverage that tower currently has? And is it less or more or equal to what was originally predicted? And I have one follow-up question.
I do not have the answer to that. Will, would you be able to answer that?
So just in general terms, it covers, it's a great question. It covers Lower Granville quite well, and the portion of Route 100 basically from just a little bit north of Post Office Hill Road, those slides that we started to review, Sohail and I, you know, all the way, not quite down to the southern boundary of the town, but at least a good stretch. It cannot, in terms of whether the predicted coverage and the actual coverage met, that's something that we could look into. My sense is that it may have actually performed a little bit better than what was predicted at the time, but it's been a while since we've looked at that. So that's something that we can certainly address when we submit our supplement.
Great, because I mean, in my personal experience, it's covered from when you come out of Hancock and you get all the way up to, you know, really just starting to enter into the Gulf, which, you know, I would guess is 1.5 miles, 2 miles, maybe 3 miles. I'm not sure, but probably less than 5 miles. But as somebody who lives when I'm up there and when my family's up there, mostly in the summer, that the coverage is obviously not just the roadway, it's a bunch of roadways up there that we can use it coming over the high road and a bunch of different areas. It covers a pretty good area, as well as it's allowed us to get rid of our landline, which was fairly expensive and we had to have year round, even though we're only up there 3 or 4 months a year. And ultimately the benefit there has been fantastic for us because it's allowed us to work from up there more reliably. And you know, whether we're walking around or going on a hike, there's a lot of area that it allows us to be able to make calls reliably. Hopefully, overall, that's been a real benefit for us and something that if it expanded to other people, we could see the benefit of it. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think Marv Wessel had his hand up. So.
Okay, I'll be real quick on that.
Yeah.
I've spent my life developing, evaluating, predicting all of this stuff for RF. I don't really have an opinion on whether or not a tower should be built or not built, unless I've been asked to, you know, evaluate data. And that's what I was asked to do here, is just evaluate data that was presented. And my opinion is whether or not it should be built. I can't answer that because I wouldn't have to look at it out my porch window. And, you know, I personally think towers are beautiful, but that's just not everybody's opinion. And I realize they've got a public safety impact because I've designed a lot of systems from scratch. So I don't have a personal feeling as to whether or not it should or should not be built, just whether or not the data seems to be true or not. That's the only opinion I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jeff.
Yeah, hi. This question's either for Mr. Dodge or Mr. Usmani. I'm just curious to build on Kate's comments. With respect to the Butts Road Tower, have you made projections as to what HPUE is capable from a coverage perspective on FirstNet, that existing tower? And the reason I ask is just based on limited knowledge in Google search. It's FirstNet's a different frequency, travels further. HPUE can extend the range significantly, maybe by 1 or 2x. So I'm curious if you've made projections off of butts of what FirstNet's capable of using that technology. And I would also note that Mr. Dodge, you were asked at the last time you came to share about this technology, but you had no familiarity with it. So I just want to get a sense for where you're at with that.
A lot more now than I did then, to be honest.
Yep.
Gladchen. But so Hale, on the predictions that you made, did you assume that well, let me put it this way. I'm going to put something up on the screen so that it'll help illustrate the question I'm trying to ask. When you were coming up with these predictions of existing coverage and the coverage with the proposed site, you're showing two colors here, correct? The -110 and the -118. So Hale, you may be on mute.
I apologize. I was still on. I thought I had it unmuted.
Do you want to take a stab at answering Mr. Gladchen's question with respect to what existing coverage here is showing in terms of a potential HPUE user?
Specifically from the Butts Road Tower, exclude the new. I'm just
Right.
curious if there's a view
The
of
new is on the right-hand side of the page. So on this map, it's on the left-hand side of the page.
So whatever you see on the left-hand side is from the existing network coverage.
So that includes that. Does that mean then?
Well, if you don't mind, if you can go to the slide where you can see the drive test or the CW test data.
Mm-hmm.
So that shows you, actually, if you can, do we have, or actually the question is whether HPUE users would be able to use the existing coverage.
Well, the question really is, do you take the new thing out of the picture completely? Have you projected what Butts Road is capable of if you add HPUE technology to that tower, essentially? If it's there, great. We can look at the data. It just wasn't clear to me, and Kate's comments made me think of it.
And I think it's a great question. But so Hale, so the actual Granville, the site to the south, just assume that it's already equipped with band 14. Mm-hmm. Is that taken into account in showing what the existing 700 megahertz LTE coverage is in this?
This is 700 megahertz, yes.
Okay. So this is already accounting for an upgrade to the Butts Hill Road to the VT6390 site, correct?
What do you mean? Sorry, what do you mean by upgrade?
Well, just the, in other words, changing out the antennas, changing out the equipment, making no other changes to the tower.
And do those changes include adding HPUE to the first responder vehicles?
And I think that's the question that I'm asking Sohail. In other words, is that taking into account?
So the coverage that you see on the left hand and the right hand side actually is the 700 megahertz spectrum coverage, which is the same spectrum. It's just slightly higher frequencies for band 14. And what I've used is AT&T's 700 megahertz, which would be similar to what you see here. So it does not take into account the HPUE unit in these slides, but that's why I asked you if you could go to the next slide where you see the -118 dBm.
Yes, this is, but this map shows with the
HPUE.
With the actual site, because this is all drive test data here. So But we can get back to you on a answer to that question. I can communicate that through, I have some follow-up items from your attorney, so I will include this among them.
Okay. I see a hand up for Jude and Ethan. Is that from the last question, or do you have an additional question? You're muted if you're speaking right now.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to lower my hand. Oh no, I'm not doing that quickly. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so it is about 8 o'clock. Just wanted to, I guess, do one last call if anyone has any final questions or comments. Okay, hearing none. Just to review the comments, requests for intervention and requests for hearing are due on the 28th of this month. That is the last Friday of this month. So I did send the department's presentation to Bruce. I've also placed it in the chat for this Zoom call. It does contain the links within the presentation, so hopefully at least some of you will find that useful. And if you have any questions as far as participation, feel free to contact me or the clerk's office. We can assist the clerk's office with the commission. We can assist at least with participation and explaining the process generally. Oh, I see. Brooke, did you have a question or a comment?
Eric, I just wanted to ask you, I had made a note when you introduced the whole thing. You said that
Yeah.
DPS had hired an aesthetics expert.
Correct. Yes.
Who is that DPS hired?
That is Trudell Consulting Engineering, or engineers, TCE. The individual from that firm is Lucy Thayer.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. With that said, one last thing to note is the department will be, as I mentioned earlier, requesting the commission hold a public hearing to receive any public comments. It is not necessary to do your comments directly to the commission. It's just a matter of preference. You can do it written through EPUC or at this public hearing date. The commission will either grant it or deny it. We're going to request that hearing be held the week of the 24th. So about approximately 2 weeks from today. So if you are interested in that, please visit the EPUC portal for this case, subscribe to it to receive any notification of that potential date. So with that said, I don't have anything else. So I think we could go ahead and end this hearing. I thank everyone for participating and asking questions. And that's it for me. So I hope everyone has a good evening.
Thanks very much, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Will, for the presentation and appreciate all your answers.